It's good to be here. It's a great day for liberty, right? It's great to be here this day, and I really want to thank the club for inviting me to be here today to speak to you all, and I'm really humbled and grateful for the contribution that you guys are giving, and I just want to thank all of you for helping in that. This is going to go a long way, and we're very excited about this, and I do want to give an update on this. As Bill was just telling you, both Gun Owners of America and GOA New York are fighting really hard to get this law struck down. So far, things are looking very promising, and so I'll get to that in a moment, but wow. What a piece of work your governor is, huh? Oh my goodness. I mean, we just got rid of a gun-grabbing Democrat governor in Virginia, where I live, booted him out this past November. But here in New York, I mean, she is just all in to make it impossible for you guys to carry anywhere. It's just amazing. You saw recently, she said that the good guy, the era of the good guy with a gun is over. Did you see that? Yeah, the whole idea of a good guy stopping a bad guy with a gun, she said, doesn't hold up. The data doesn't bear this out. Well, that's really interesting because, you know, Ms. Hochul, I would say to you, if that's so, then are you going to fire your security guards? I mean, people want to know, right? I mean, just asking. I mean, because if good guys with guns don't stop bad guys with guns, then why do you need all those armed guys surrounding you, Kathy? You know, what a double standard. I tell you, if it wasn't for double standards, liberals would have no standards at all. But you know, you have to think about that for a second, don't you? Yeah. But General Hochul and the rest of the far left, you know, they love, and you guys know this, they love to tap dance on the graves of dead victims. So they point to tragedies like the one that happened at the New York subway or the Uvalde school or Parkland. But you know what all those places had in common? Gun-free zones. Exactly right. What a difference it would have made if one of us had been there, right? Exercising our Second Amendment rights. What if an armed Stephen Williford had been there? Do you know who Stephen Williford is? He's a co-worker of mine now, but he's known as the Barefoot Defender. He is the guy who, when his daughter heard the shooting down the street at the local church, he just grabbed his AR-15, didn't even put on his shoes, ran down the street and stopped that mass shooter. That was Stephen Williford. Great guy. But see, that's the point. Good guys like Stephen Williford are stopping mass shootings from coast to coast. Of course, you don't see CNN reporting on that, do you? Yet it's happening again and again and again. You probably saw the story, a young adult earlier this summer took out a mass shooter at the Indianapolis Mall 15 seconds after the bad guy fired the first shot. Now, for those of you who like numbers, what that means is that young hero, who's a private citizen, stopped the mass shooter in that mall 308 times faster than the police did at Uvalde. So what does that tell you? I mean, it's like the old saying, when seconds count, the police are minutes away. And in fact, sadly, in the case of Uvalde, they were over an hour away. How tragic that was. But the truth is, and I know you know this, you are your own first responder, whether it's an intruder in your home, whether it's a mass shooter, or an enemy that's foreign or domestic. That responsibility falls to you. That right belongs to you. And General Hochul, you know, if you don't agree with that, if you don't agree with our Bill of Rights, then pack your bags and move out. Leave. In fact, we can even help you with that this November, right? Realize there is a huge difference this November. If you want to get rid of the trampling on your Second Amendment rights, there is a way to make it stop, because there is a clear difference between Lee Zeldin and Kathy Hochul. Back to mass shootings, you know, Indianapolis wasn't the only place where a hero stopped a bad guy this year. In West Virginia, I love this story. A guy showed up to a graduation party. He was ticked off about something. He had an AR-15 with him. He was trying to gun down as many people as he could. Well, instead, he ran into a lady with a gun. Hallelujah. You got to love ladies with a gun, right? And you know what's ironic? It wasn't even a big gun at that. It wasn't like a 1911 or a Glock 17. She had a measly Glock 43. And I say measly, I mean, look, that's the gun I carry when I'm at home. I like that gun. But comparatively, but look, that's all it took was a single stack 9mm handgun was all she needed. She drew her pistol, shot the guy, and here's the good news. Not one person was killed at that party except for the bad guy. And that's the way it should be. So, you know, when Miss Hochul says the era of the good guy with the gun is over, well, maybe she was neglecting the good gals, right? But look, those are just some of the examples from all across the country. Guns are obviously saving lives every day. And that's why we need to secure our schools the same way that we secure the White House, the same way that we secure the Congress with guns, right? I mean, how cynical is that we protect the politicians with guns, but then we leave our children defenseless? I mean, that's absolutely terrible. But I will say this, inside every dark cloud, you know what they say, there's a silver lining. The Parkland school shooting that occurred in 2018 was very tragic indeed. It was a gun-free zone. But in the space of 1 year after that, the number of school districts that were arming teachers in this country doubled after the Parkland shooting. Folks, we are making progress. That is good news. And we're looking to make progress here against Governor Hochul's very tyrannical carry law. So let me give you an update on where we're at. So GOA New York, we sued the state of New York in federal court. The case went before the judge in August, and he agreed with gun owners in everything and in every way, but dismissed the case on a technicality. Now, we're not done yet, okay? We are coming back to him. And what's interesting is that Hochul's team celebrated their supposed victory very loudly, but let me tell you, their rejoicing is a bit premature. You know, we're in the midst of football season, right? So to put it in football terms, the opponents have kicked a field goal. It's 3-0. And we're driving the football. It's late in the fourth quarter. There's less than a minute left. But we're on their 5-yard line, and it's 1st and goal. That's really the situation that we have, because the good news is that the judge has already agreed with us that the New York law is unconstitutional. Now, the problem was the Second Circuit, and that's where we are here, that's where you all live, the Second Circuit, has some very unique standards for standing that are different than the entire rest of the country. So it makes it a bit difficult. So our attorneys are busy working through that right now before we go to the judge, and we'll be going back to the judge within 13 days. That's our cutoff. By the way, I should say this, if any of you, either yourselves or you know somebody who doesn't yet have a carry permit but wants to get one, please speak to me afterwards. We do have some actually we have many plaintiffs, but we are still getting more because we're using them in different situations. So please see me afterwards. I'm very optimistic about our chances in this. I mean, after all, the judge has already told us that he agrees with us about the law itself. Let me give you some examples of what he talked about. For example, as you all know, the new law severely limits where people can carry, the so-called sensitive places, right? So for those of you who could carry before the Bruin decision, before the Supreme Court decision, all of a sudden found New York State ripped that away from you and put the entire state, virtually the entire state, off limits. If you're not familiar already, here's just some of the sensitive places. More, that's, I guess, just an acronym for gun-free zone, really. But here's some of the places where people cannot carry now. Any store or gas station that doesn't post a guns are allowed sign. How ridiculous is that? All parks, museums, places of entertainment, subways or metros, churches, doctor's offices, schools, restaurants that serve alcohol. I mean, the list goes on and on. Honestly, it probably would have been easier for the state to just tell you where you could carry. I think that would have been a shorter list. But, you know, this is an act of true defiance, really, by the state legislature and the general herself. So anyway, we pointed all this out in our first round before the judge, and the judge agreed with us that these limitations that the state has placed on all of you is unconstitutional under the Supreme Court's Bruin decision and under the Second Amendment. So that's good news. That is a win waiting to happen right there. Then there's the good moral character test, so-called. Now, the Supreme Court in June struck down the previous test, if you remember, the proper cause test that New York had been using, but then they replaced it with this even more draconian good moral character test. Well, the judge in August ruled, or what he stated in his opinion, was that this gives too much discretion to bureaucrats. So that, again, he thought was too far. And then the social media requirement, which I know you all have heard about this. First time applicants are going to have to give 3 years of their social media posts to get approval. You know, have you criticized the governor lately on social media? Look out, that could cost you your application, right? Well, the judge, boy, he was really firm on this, agreed that that was unconstitutional too. You know, it was really interesting. I actually sat there. Well, I actually wasn't in the courtroom. Because of weather, I could only make it to New York City. Bill was there in the courtroom, but I was Zooming because, you know, the state had questions for me. So I sat there virtually in the courtroom listening to the state attorney appeal to racist gun laws from our past to justify the new restrictions on concealed carry. This was mind-boggling. They said that this was the historical precedent for New York's law because in colonial times, there were laws restricting Catholics and restricting blacks from owning and possessing and carrying firearms. And so that was the precedent, if you can believe it or not, that New York is using to justify the new law that they just passed in June. I mean, this was a stunning admission on their part. I mean, haven't we always said that gun control is racist, always has been, always is, always will be? Well, they just admitted that. It was truly incredible. So General Hochul wants to see all of your, if you're a new applicant, wants to see your social media post to make sure that you're suitable enough, suitable enough to carry a gun. Obviously, that gives incredible, crazy, excessive power to government officials to determine who's suitable and who's not. I mean, if you remember your history, this is exactly what happened to the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. After his house was bombed, he went to get a carry permit. He was denied a carry permit in Alabama in 1956. Why? Well, apparently, his skin color was not considered suitable enough. See, let's not kid ourselves. We still live with this today. Studies show that blacks in Los Angeles have a harder time proving that they should be granted concealed carry permits than do whites. And that discrimination occurs in other places too, like here in New York, where the state attorney is actually appealing to those past racist laws to justify their restrictions on you. I mean, this is really incredible. It truly is. Anti-gun leftists have made it virtually impossible for good people like those of us here in this room to exercise self-defense, even while they have their own armed security guards taking care of them. I mean, they really are elitists who think that they deserve better protection and better privileges than the rest of us. So in other words, guns for me, but not for thee. I mean, that's basically their motto, and it's shameful. It really is. But this is why we have to work so hard to preserve our Second Amendment protected rights. We can't compromise. We cannot settle for gun control light, ever. Gun control light is gun control, because every new compromise that we might engage in becomes the starting point for the next round of calls for gun control. That's all compromise has ever gotten us. The other side has never gone away and said, thanks, we're satisfied now, that's enough. No, they're always back for more. And look, what is it that the Second Amendment says? Help me out. Shall not be infringed, right? It's very clear, very plain. It doesn't say that you can have a background check. It doesn't say that you can have a waiting period or a ban on bump stocks or Hughes Amendment or permits or, any of the myriad of restrictions that we see throughout the country. Well, why not? Well, because our rights don't come from the government, do they? Our Declaration of Independence says that everyone is endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So you know what that means? Our rights come from Him. Our rights come from God. So you and me should not have to ask for permission to exercise our rights, right? We shouldn't have to ask for permission to carry arms. It is our right given directly to us by Almighty God. So what does all this mean? By the way, for any of you who are interested in where the founders might have gotten that, check out Luke 22:36. Direct words from our Savior couldn't be more direct. But what this means is, to Governor Hochul, if you would be watching this, take your hands off our guns, right? Keep your hands off of them. Look, a government that does not trust the people and fears their guns is a government that itself cannot be trusted, right? I mean, this is something that our founders knew. Now, this is an appropriate question, given that it's Constitution Day. Who knows who is considered to be the father of the Constitution? Shout it out. James Madison, thank you. That's right. So the man who is considered to be the father of the Constitution, listen to what he said in Federalist 46. The Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, where the governments, hear this, where the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. Well, why do you think those other governments would be afraid to trust the people with arms? Well, maybe it's because authoritarians and tyrants like compliant subjects, right? They don't like it when the people that they're abusing can shoot back. Look, we've seen this movie before. We know what happens in countries where government authoritarians don't want the people to have guns, and they take their guns. I mean, we've seen what's happened in Germany in the past, in the Soviet Union, in China, Rwanda, Cambodia, and many other countries. We know how that movie ends. It ends with gun registration, followed by gun confiscation, and then many times even it ends in genocide. I mean, extremely brutal. Time and time again, those who give up their rights end up being persecuted by those in power. And so that's why to General Hochul, we have to say, look, we're not just going to stand by and let you strip us of our rights. We're going to fight you in the courts tooth and nail. We're going to fight you politically tooth and nail. And GOA and GOA New York are fighting together amongst with others. We're fighting hard, fighting back against this. We're fighting her in court. We're also fighting on another very important front. And I'm sure you've probably heard of the sanctuary states and counties that have been cropping up around the country. They're often known as Second Amendment Protection Acts. And these are very valuable. They tell your state or federal government that we're not going to enforce your gun control in our jurisdiction, so take your gun laws and shove it. I'm kind of loosely quoting the laws, but anyway, I'm happy to report that we're making some real headway on this front. Before Joe Biden was elected, check this out, before he was elected, there were only 4 states that had passed Second Amendment sanctuary laws, only 4. But during Biden's administration, the number of states achieving sanctuary status has quadrupled. So now there are 16 states that are basically giving it to the Fed, protecting their citizens against Second Amendment infringements from the federal government. By the way, that's more states than now are immigration sanctuary states. It used to be reversed. There were more immigration sanctuary states. Now, because of Biden, there are far more sanctuary states for the Second Amendment. So 16 states, in some form or another, have said they will not assist Joe Biden's unelected minions from imposing any unconstitutional gun control that he imposes. And so that's a very awesome progress that we're making. You know, this is something that is not new. One of our founding fathers, Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist Paper 28, said that it's the state governments that will afford complete security against invasions of the public liberty by the national authority. See, that's exactly what is happening today. States are resisting unlawful federal acts, but it's not just at the state level, it's also at the localities bubbling up. With GOA's help, more than 60% of the counties in this country, and that includes some states in their entirety, 60% of the counties have told either their own state or they've told the federal government that they will not enforce gun control. And so that right there is also, I mean, that's a huge rebuke to Joe Biden's efforts at gun control. 60% of the counties saying we're not going to help enforce your gun control. And I mean, that's very significant. Now, the left is trying to undermine this. So Bloomberg, for example, thank you for sharing him with the rest of the country. Bloomberg has gone into Oregon where, and we've squared off in court against him. There was a citizen-passed Second Amendment sanctuary ordinance there. And so Bloomberg came in and tried to get it struck down in court. So we were asked to come into the state with our legal team, and we did, to defend the measure, and ultimately the court sided with Gun Owners of America. So that was very exciting. Now it's not over yet. It's still on appeal, but for now we have sent Michael Bloomberg back to New York City with a big L on his forehead. So that's exciting. But hey, this is an important case. Cases like this are very important because if Bloomberg can use the courts to strike down these laws all over the country, it'll kill the Second Amendment sanctuary movement. I mean, like a set of dominoes, we'll see these laws overturned. And so that could doom efforts not only in other states, but also ultimately here in New York, where you guys could certainly make very good use of sanctuary counties. So it's really important to continue getting these passed. Now think about how this works and why this is so incredibly helpful. There are some federal crimes, gun crimes, where the feds prosecute less than 1% of the cases. So that means they're relying on the states and the localities to enforce those laws and to prosecute those laws. So what happens if the state says, we're not going to prosecute those, we're not going to arrest on those laws? Then guess what? They don't get prosecuted. See, that's the beauty. And the same thing happens not just at the state level telling the feds, but also at the county level too, where here in New York, they could be resisting what the general is requiring. I remember when New York passed the the misnamed SAFE Act in 2013. A lot of sheriffs came out and said that they wouldn't enforce the magazine ban, right? But see, that's the idea. That's a form of sanctuary protection, and that's the spirit of constitutional resistance that we really want to keep alive. And when I say constitutional resistance, I say that because it's the very thing that our founding fathers did. They did it in 1776 with the British. They did it again in 1798. That's when Virginia and Kentucky told the Congress that it had better repeal the Alien and Sedition Acts, or they would refuse to allow those laws to be enforced within their own borders. Now, these laws basically punish people, among other things, punish people with prison time for criticizing government officials. In fact, even one of Ben Franklin's grandsons, who was a publisher, was arrested for criticizing our second president, John Adams. So, never mind the First Amendment, right? Well, Virginia and Kentucky challenged these laws, the Alien and Sedition Acts, and James Madison wrote for Virginia, Thomas Jefferson wrote for Kentucky, but Madison said that when the federal government is acting outside of its authority, which it does a lot these days, does it not? He said the states are duty-bound to interpose for arresting the progress of evil. Is that not so beautifully stated? It's the states that have the duty to arrest the progress of evil. And so that was Virginia and Kentucky in 1789. And since then, our country has taken on a very long and noble tradition of resisting state and federal laws that violate the Constitution, because the Constitution is the gold standard. I mean, here on this Constitution Day, we, acknowledge that, but not just today. And Alexander Hamilton went on to say that any law which is not consistent with the Constitution is not the supreme law of the land, should not be considered the supreme law of the land. He said that such a supposed law is a usurpation of power. That's in Federalist 33, and he nailed it. I mean, he was absolutely correct on that. So we're making a lot of headway in this area. For example, in Wyoming this year, GOA got a law passed that could sentence a government official in jail for up to a year if he or she dares to enforce Joe Biden's gun control. I think New York needs a law like that, huh? How about that? And in a nearby state in North Dakota, we're suing the federal government there as an act of resistance because we're trying to bring down the ATF registry that Joe Biden is creating. Let me tell you about this battle real quick, because this is something that affects everybody in this room. And if you haven't heard about it, this is really monumental. On August 24th, the ATF frame and receiver rule went into effect. I almost said became the law of the land, but I refuse to say that because unconstitutional edicts are not the law of the land. Anyway, this was pursuant to Biden's executive order from last year, and basically it does two things. First of all, it regulates homemade guns, so now that there's a background check on 80% receivers. And some of you may be thinking, well, I don't make my own guns, so that doesn't really apply to me. Well, if that's the case, then listen to the second thing that this rule does. This rule seeks to register every gun that was ever sold with a 4473 form. Now, before this rule went into effect, dealers were allowed to dispose of the 4473 forms, which you fill out when you buy a gun, after 20 years. But now the rule prevents them from ever discarding and destroying those 4473 forms. And this is happening at the same time that the ATF is going around to dealers and trying to extort them, to force them to either send in their 4473 forms to the ATF right now, or to put in a searchable database, a software that the ATF would have uninterrupted access to retrieve the names of gun owners 24/7. See, they are building a registration list. I mean, they've already started with this, and what they want is your name, your social security number, and the serial number of the gun. All that is on the front page of the 4473 form. Look, this has been the dream of the anti-gun left all along, hasn't it? I mean, they want to register every gun and every gun owner in America. We submitted a Freedom of Information Act request last year. And after that, we would eventually learn that the ATF has 1 billion gun owners' records, almost 1 billion. That's billion with a B, not million, billion. And almost 900 million of them are already digitized. Those records are digitized. See, this is what they want. They want a record of all the guns that you have. I mean, the left has already said that they want to confiscate firearms, haven't they? I mean, remember Senator Dianne Feinstein back in the 1990s? She was speaking to Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes. And if you remember this famous quote, she was talking about her first ban on semi-automatic firearms. And she said, if I could have gotten 51 votes for an outright ban, picking up every one of them, Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in, I would have done it. Wow, that's thank you for that admission. And then how can we forget Beto O'Rourke in the most recent Democrat National Convention? Blank, yeah, we're going to take your AR-15s and your AK-47s. See, again, the left wants this registry. Why? So that they can confiscate. That's absolutely what this is about. It's not about solving crime. In fact, in the Freedom of Information Act requests that went to the ATF, they were asked how many crimes have been solved using these 4473 forms and the e-tracing, and you know what their answer was? We can't answer that. It's not about safety. It's all about knowing who the gun owners are and where the guns are. By the way, on this case that I was just telling you about, the one that we're involved in North Dakota, we were very blessed to have 17 state attorney generals from across the country join our case. I know you won't be surprised if I tell you that New York's was not part of that. But this is what was encouraging. They liked our attorney's arguments so much, they didn't just file a friend of the court brief. No, they actually asked to be joined in to the case. So they're actually now parties to the case along with Gun Owners of America. So we have some real star power backing this case, 17 attorney generals. That was very exciting. So as you can see, there's a lot going on federally, state-wise. You guys know that at the state level, obviously. But you know, one thing, let me tell you this. One thing that you can count on from Gun Owners of America, GOA New York, we don't support infringements. We never support infringements. GOA was the first national gun rights group to start advocating for constitutional carry. That was back in the mid-1990s, and you'll remember back then that there was only one state at the time which had permitless carry. What state was that? Vermont. They've had it since the beginning of the founding of the country, right? But as we meet here today, almost 1/2 of the country now has constitutional carry. This is incredible progress that is being made. 1/2 of the country. And here's some additional good news. Not only that, there are now far more constitutional carry states than there are red flag states. So again, I mean, we're making progress. I mean, we only hear a lot of times about the negative, but we're quietly making a lot of progress around the country. We are in a battle for our rights across this nation, as you know, and really we all have to stick together. And that's why one reason I'm so grateful to be here tonight, to be with you all. I'm very grateful for Bill of GOA New York and all the help that he's provided to us. He's fighting hard here in New York. We're both suing the state together. And GOA is suing the federal government on multiple fronts. There's many other cases that I haven't even mentioned tonight. I won't, but it's a very ambitious and expensive agenda. I mean, to be quite honest, and just looking at the New York case alone, we're looking at spending upwards of $100,000. So again, I'm just really grateful and just want to thank you all for the contribution that you have made to that case, because it is, I mean, it's a long slog, and then there's, you know, little technicalities, and you have to almost go back to go, but, you know, you're not quite at go, and you know how it is. I mean, it's just, it's a long thing, and then there's appeals, and then there's ultimately maybe back to the U.S. Supreme Court. And, you know, when you hear all that, I know it's tempting to get a little bit dispirited. And, you know, I can only imagine, I mean, I lived through 4 years of a horridly racist anti-gun governor in Virginia, and that was really bad. But just as I get ready to wrap this up, I want to end with a little bit of our history here on Constitution Day, which hopefully would offer some hope and encouragement to you. So here's a question for you. On this day, 245 years ago exactly, do you know where George Washington was? Where was George Washington? Now, this is not a trick question like who's buried in Grant's tomb, okay? No, where was George Washington? He was here in New York, exactly. They were 2 days away from fighting the first of two very important battles at Saratoga. And then very soon after that, they would be embarking upon a really cold winter at Valley Forge. I hope they still teach about this in our schools. But that was a particularly brutal time for Washington and the rest of the Army. I mean, you know, we think we have it rough today, fighting the battles that we're fighting. No, he had it rough. He had men who died of exposure, died of influenza, pneumonia. Almost 2,000 troops died at Valley Forge. And not only that, those who didn't die still suffered tremendously. They had to deal with things like scabies and typhoid and dysentery. And George Washington even said that the smell of rotting horses was just, it was almost unbearable. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, how did this ragtag group win against a better funded, well-rested army? Well, I'll tell you how. One of my favorite portraits of all time, and I'm not really an art guy, but I love this portrait. It's hanging in my office right now, right above when I look up from my computer. It's a portrait of George Washington in the snow at Valley Forge, kneeling next to his horse praying. And I'm sure many of you have probably seen this portrait. It's relatively famous. By the way, many of the people who knew Washington said that was the kind of man that he was, that they would walk in on him and they would find him on his knees praying. So, I mean, like multiple reports of this. He was a man of prayer, and that's really why I like that painting, because it's a reminder to me of where the battle is really won. And George Washington knew this, and so did many other founding fathers. It wasn't just like he was a, you know, weird whack job that was just kind of out there. No, Thomas Jefferson penned these words in the Declaration of Independence. In the midst of the war that they were fighting, they said they were, quote, appealing to the supreme judge of the world to give them the help they needed. The supreme judge of the world. He wasn't talking about the United Nations, right? No, I mean, this is where their hope was. And these are the words that every founding father signed their name to in that agreement. They appealed to God, they prayed to God, and in doing that, I think they really teach us to be very careful about something. On the one hand, we do have to be very active, and we have to contribute resources to the fights that are before us, and that's very important. On the other hand, we have to beware that we don't become so active that we neglect to tap into the most important power. And I think, you know, just as the popular saying goes, when life gives you more than you can stand, then kneel. Even if it's in the snow next to your horse, right? But anyway, that's my strong encouragement tonight, as that we not forget the example that our founding fathers set for us. Look, I know there's a lot of passion in this room, and it's been great getting to meet a lot of you, and I thank you for defending the Second Amendment the way you guys are doing. And you know there's a lot to do, and we have to stay vigilant. We have to pray. We have to vote. Man, we have to get out there and vote and get others to vote, has been already stated. Otherwise, we're going to lose our rights. Again, Thomas Jefferson said, "The spirit of resistance to government is so valuable that I wish it to always be kept alive." You see, Jefferson says we have to resist. And thankfully, we haven't reached the point where armed resistance is necessary as it was in 1775. There's still many, many opportunities to save our rights without resorting to the cartridge box. There's the ballot box and the soap box and the court box, or maybe it's the jury box. All those are still available to us, and GOA and GOA New York, we are here for the long haul. We're fighting in the legislature, we're fighting in the courts. I mean, the governor may think that she's won the day, but that's really only strengthened our resolve. I love the example of John Paul Jones, when it seemed like all hope was lost, and the British commander told him to surrender his ship. And you know what he said? "I have not yet begun to fight." I love that, right? I mean, and that, we're not done fighting by any means. We're never done. This is not the finish line here. We are mobilizing for a long, protracted effort to win back our rights. And believe me, your activism is making a difference. I mean, I know you know that, but I think sometimes you just need to be encouraged with that. And I see this all the time. I mean, let me just give you an example from the federal level this year. Even in the past several years, we've stopped a lot of gun control from passing in a Congress where anti-gun Democrats have the majority. And just in one gun control battle alone this year, GOA generated more than 100,000 letters and emails and phone calls just into the Senate alone. And I heard from multiple sources on Capitol Hill that our members are being super loud in the Senate offices. And I even had staffers tell me that some senators who have occasionally supported gun control in the past, they said, boy, they had decided not to vote for gun control because they were just hearing from our members so loudly. And so here's the point. If GOA and GOA New York and the Federated Sportsman Club, I mean, if groups like this weren't here generating activism, there would be a lot more gun control passing. It's because of our activism and because they're hearing our voices and because we mobilize for elections and take them to court. I mean, this is what really makes a difference. So I just want to encourage you with that. And if you haven't already visited our website, I encourage you to go to gunowners.org. When you're there, please sign up for our free email alerts. Again, they are free, absolutely free. But that helps us to mobilize even more people because we're going to be facing a lot of battles, a lot of continued battles. And anybody will tell you who is a member and they get our stuff, we make it so easy for you to take action. Just clicking a mouse or just filling out your name on a postcard, and that makes a difference. When I go up to Capitol Hill, I frequently hear, "Oh, your GOA, your members are loud." I love hearing that. We also just published a book, Firing Back. This is all about helping people become more active in preserving our liberties. I have a bunch of these that I brought with me, but just to tell you really quickly, what this book does, it spends a good bit of time shooting down the gun control myths that are out there. But not only that, it especially focuses on how important firearms are to keeping a country free. And so this is one of my daughters. She said, "Dad, hurry up and finish writing this book because I've got anti-gun friends I need to use this with." I mean, that's what it's built for, is to helping you guys not only formulate better arguments. And I've been, Bill will tell you, I've been debating the left, CNN, MSNBC for decades now, over 30 years. And so taking all that practicum, putting it in here to help encourage other people. But not only that, also giving examples of like what I was talking about earlier, how confiscating guns can lead to genocide. But then on the opposite hand, how having firearms, like even most recently in the civil rights era, how that has resulted in pushing back against official oppression. I mean, stories like this need to be told and retold. So as important as all that education is, though, three things that this really does that's important is how you can make a difference today, how people can multiply their voices in the political arena, and how we can win people over to our side. And so there's great examples of that in the book. So anyway, the book's about getting people educated and then getting them motivated, which is really what we do at GOA. I mean, that's how we're going to win this. So again, for those of you who've been fighting the fight, I so want to thank you for your activism, for your contributions, for supporting the cause that's making a difference. You know, let's keep working together. Let's bring the heat on those compromising politicians. Let's send the governor packing and send her home this November. And let's overturn that draconian carry law here in the state. And together we're going to do this. So thank you, everybody. God bless.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, sir.
Well done.
Thanks, man.